Welcome back, fancy lords and ladies. I am your host, the fanciest man of Cornwood, and I'm back tonight with another in our series about this upcoming Magic the Gathering Final Fantasy set that we're going to see in June of next year. And just like I said in the first video, I don't typically get too excited about sets that are so far off. I think we have so much content that comes out now, and there's so much to keep up with. It's just kind of silly to get too worked up about something that far off. But I will say this is one of my favorite IPs in the video game world. It's obviously got a really special place in my heart, nostalgia-wise, for especially the first few releases that we got here in the United States. Those were games that came out while I was a kid and just kind of helped form my love of RPGs, and especially my love of just kind of the whole Japanese way of designing those RPGs back in those days. The art style that they used that was so distinctive from some of the stuff we were seeing here in America and things like that. So yeah, just always going to have that nostalgia place, if nothing else. But I'm going to continue tonight with just the next game in the series, and it's not sequentially the next game for me because unfortunately we didn't get this game in America right off the bat. But once I did finally get to play Final Fantasy II, I really liked it. This is one of those games that took a lot of work to get into because it threw such a curveball in how you improved your characters, how you increased their stats and things like that. And it was such a huge departure from what I had been raised on of, going out, killing monsters, getting experience, getting levels off experience, and then watching your characters grow that way. Final Fantasy II had a really unique take on how to increase those, and I think we've seen it utilized a little bit more in games like Morrowind, Skyrim, games where you use a skill and then that skill increases. This is a really early precursor for that, and something that was super unique at the time and really wasn't emulated for quite a while in a mainstream kind of way, in a mainstream release of a game. But how this could translate to Magic, I think could be really interesting. Like we talked about in the first video, we've seen classes, we've seen some things that could be kind of a direct port over from these first few Final Fantasy games to Magic. But this one is a little bit different. I'd like to see something where if we're using certain types of spell effects, maybe, beyond just instants or sorceries, if we're playing, maybe a creature that has a certain trait or a spell or a instant or sorcery that does a certain thing, it's looking for certain rules text, maybe even something like that, where we could then improve how we specialize in that type of spell. I think that could be really, really cool. And that would be true to how unique this game was and kind of what it meant overall in the series. Even though it wasn't one of the bigger hits of the series, we might not get a lot based off this one. It still could be fun to just revisit some of those mechanisms that made it such an interesting game. But that's not all this game had to offer, and I'd like to go ahead and look at a couple of the characters. First, we have Firion. If you played Final Fantasy II and then you had, came into it like I did after playing a lot of other RPGs, this whole kind of trope of the orphan that is taken in, trained to fight, turned against some evil empire or something like that, like Firion was. Now that it's been a while, obviously it's been played out in multiple games. It's been played out in multiple kind of types of media, things like that. But at the time, I think this was probably something really unique for that Japanese audience that got to experience the game first, and then even going back to it years later as someone that grew up in America, played a lot of RPGs, kind of watched these archetypes, these tropes play out in the RPGs, especially those that were set in more medieval times and kind of implied that they were in kind of a version of our past history, things like that. I still thought Firion was a really interesting character. I liked that they had the revenge backstory for him. Again, not super unique now, but when Finn was kind of taken over, it had that cutscene in game that was probably pretty tough to do on the Famicom, but they still managed to give it some gravity. I remember fighting those Black Knights, and it's just one of those battles you look at and it's hopeless. But I like Firion's just what is the word I'm looking for? His persistence throughout the story, and being one of the first named and kind of given his own dialogue in the Final Fantasy series. I think that's special enough to warrant some kind of revisit, even if it's something that's not in a main set or something like that. I do hope we get to see him kind of have his moment to shine, and given the card or something like that just shows persistence. Maybe some kind of way to get stronger and stronger despite damage or something like that. I think that would fit really well with how he functioned in the story. And then I've also got Princess Hilda. Again, two characters that you see in the really early part of this game, but two characters that just stuck with me when I was playing through it. I like seeing the kind of resistance leader that's already installed somewhere as a leader in a nation, has something to lose, something to risk, something like that. And, I thought looking back on it, that's probably a pretty bold choice for the time again. Just the way that they did this story and kind of put Princess Hilda in that position. So could be a really interesting character, maybe something political. I'd like to see more of that stuff come into Magic, where it's not just overpowered as a card because it's doing something broken, but because it's doing something interesting and allows you to kind of maybe king make a little bit or play politics, something like that. I think Hilda could be an interesting addition based on that. Next, I want to look at a few of the enemies from Final Fantasy II. I know there's a lot of regular enemies. There's a Buccaneer. There's some of the dragons from Final Fantasy II that had really cool sprites for back in the day, and really looked good in some of the remake versions they did that I played through. But these are two enemies that just stuck out to me. Borgin is just kind of that comical nincompoop that can't really do anything right, but is on the powerful side, on the side of the evil empire. I'd like to see him included just for kind of comedic effect, and then maybe being one of these creatures that has a drawback, and maybe they could make the drawback something interesting. But yeah, I always liked the inclusion of those characters as foils for the main characters, the protagonists. And then the other creature we have here is actually one that when I was kind of messaging back and forth with my play group about this set and about what we were excited about, one of the guys brought this up, and he was totally on the money. The Marlboros are such an iconic monster to run into, and it's funny, I never remember them being included in the story. They're never really important for the plot. And yet every time I'd see one of these in a game, I just thought, man, that's so cool. I know my party is about to get hit with every status effect, every kind of poison or debuff that game had to offer. And I'd love to see something like that in Magic. I'd love to see this as a creature that can give maybe a bunch of different kinds of counters that are negative. Other creatures giving them -1/-1 counters, poison counters to players. Maybe even rad counters from Fallout, something like that. I think that would be really neat to see. And it would definitely be, a card that's not just iconic for this game, but can carry over to the whole franchise. There's 4 or 5 games at least that I can think of off the top of my head where I could definitely include Marlboros, and I don't think anyone would bat an eye. I think a lot of people would be just kind of excited for the nostalgia hit that seeing them in a card would bring. So yeah, that's what I'd like to point out in the Marlboros. All right, and last but not least, I kind of touched on this in the first video. I really think we're going to get some just amazing vehicles out of this set, and I'm hopeful that we will. I think they could even have a whole subtype just for airships, and maybe giving groups of creatures flying or something like that. The Dreadnought is really cool. It's really iconic. It's one of a bunch of these kind of dungeon/airships that we're going to see in the series. This is certainly not the only one. The one from Final Fantasy IV, that's a pretty iconic one as well. The Giant, and I would just love to see them used in multiple ways, maybe even as vehicles and dungeons. I really want to see some new dungeons from the Final Fantasy set and see that concept expanded. I thought that it was done pretty well in those Dungeons and Dragons sets, but it's definitely something that I would be up for them expanding and adding on to and things like that. So yeah, excited about the possibility of that. So this was a short one, guys. I just wanted to kind of give my thoughts on Final Fantasy II. You know, if this is a game that you sat and played through, then you know that you had to put a little bit of love into this game to finish it. I remember the first playthrough I had where I actually got to the Dreadnought, kind of got toward the end game. I was just so relieved for all the work that I had put into leveling those characters, or not even into leveling, but to building their skills and things like that. That work had actually paid off. So, as always, if you like the content, please leave me one of those likes. Please feel free to subscribe. Generally on the channel, we'll be talking about Commander and looking at deck techs and hopefully ways to improve our Commander play. And yeah, we'll be back to that later this week. But again, this is just something I'm excited. Even though it's far off in the horizon, I want to kind of get the juices flowing, and I'm happy to go through these games and just relive a little bit of the nostalgia, even putting these videos together. So appreciate everyone that stuck around. Feel free to come back by the channel later the week. We should have some more videos posted by then. In the meantime, thanks for stopping by and keep playing Commander.